Part 1, 700 words. The first light of dawn crept across the great plains like a cautious traveler, painting the grasses in pale gold and softening the sharp edges of the night. But nothing, no sunrise, no stretch of horizon, could soften the brutal sight beneath the old cottonwood tree. A young white girl hung there, wrists tied tightly above her head with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin until they bled. Her feet touched the earth only enough to keep her barely conscious, her body swaying gently as the wind nudged her like a cold, indifferent hand. Her name was Sarah Whitlock, though no one around these parts would have known it. Her family had only recently settled near the edge of Comanche territory, on land her father swore up and down was granted legally through a territorial agent whose handshake seemed more confident than his papers. The night before, everything had been ordinary: quiet supper, the smell of beans simmering, her father oiling his rifle, her mother humming some hymn she never quite finished. And then, in a burst of chaos, all of it had been ripped apart. Now Sarah could barely remember how she'd been dragged from her home. Shadows, rough hands, a cloth over her mouth, hoarse shouting she couldn't understand. When she woke, she wasn't in her small cabin anymore. She was here, alone, bound, and branded with shame. The wooden sign hanging around her neck slapped against her chest every time the wind shifted. The words carved into it, Indian land, were crude, jagged, cut by someone in a hurry or someone too filled with anger to care how the letters looked. The message was for settlers, for wanderers, for anyone who dared cross this patch of earth. But Sarah sensed something more sinister too. This wasn't the work of tribes. It wasn't their way. Even a frightened, half-conscious girl knew that. Hours passed, she wasn't sure how many, blurring together in a haze of burning wrists, a stiff neck, aching legs, and an overwhelming thirst that made her tongue feel heavy, thick, useless. She had screamed at first, begging, pleading for someone to hear her. But night swallowed her voice, and the empty plains carried only silence back. She had stopped screaming eventually, partly from exhaustion, partly from fear that whatever cruel men brought her here might return if they heard her again. She had cried until she couldn't anymore. She prayed in whispered fragments, not even sure the words were the right ones. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Smaller than the tree behind her, smaller than the open land, smaller than the wide sky that seemed miles above her yet watched her with cold indifference. Every rustle in the grass made her flinch. Every coyote howl in the distance made her tremble. She imagined wolves, imagined men even worse than wolves, coming back to finish what they started. The sign hanging from her neck felt heavier by the minute, as though it carried the weight of some hidden design she wasn't meant to understand. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that someone had heard her. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. Several miles away, perched atop a rugged ridge carved by centuries of wind, a lone Comanche scout scanned the plains through narrowed eyes. His name was Dakota, a man of few words and fewer attachments. He had grown accustomed to stillness after the government's push forced his family far from the lands they knew best. The ridges, the valleys, the secret watering holes, Dakota still visited them. Not out of nostalgia, but out of responsibility. A man should know when strangers crossed the bones of his ancestors. At first he thought the sound was a hawk, the short, sharp whistle carried strangely by the wind. But hawks didn't cry twice. And certainly not in the voice of a girl. Part 2, 700 words. Dakota approached the cottonwood on foot, leaving his horse tethered behind a rise where its silhouette wouldn't give him away. The plains were deceptive, wide and open, yet full of places where danger could crouch low, silent and patient. He scanned everything: the ground for fresh tracks, the brush for movement, the horizon for dust trails that would signal riders returning. Nothing, only the girl, half-conscious and swaying like a wilted flower caught in a harsh wind. When he finally stepped into her line of sight, Sarah's head jerked up with a fright so sharp it tore a gasp from her throat. At first, she thought the men who left her had returned. Then she registered the figure. Tall, dark hair braided loosely, dressed in buckskin patched from long use, a knife sheathed at his hip, eyes steady but alert. A Comanche, a real one, not the painted impostors who'd seized her. She recoiled weakly, her body trembling. She had been taught, like many settlers' children, to fear his people. She didn't want to fear him now, but fear had a way of gripping the heart before reason could speak. Dakota lifted one hand slightly, a gesture neither friendly nor hostile, simply announcing himself. "You are safe for the moment," he said in measured English, each word careful and low. "I will not harm you." Sarah wanted to believe him, but exhaustion had eaten through her strength and judgment. Her lips struggled around the single word she could manage. Help. Dakota circled the tree again, analyzing the knots, the way the rope had been tied. Not Comanche work, too rushed, too crude, too theatrical. Comanche were many things, some fierce, some proud, some angry, but they were not wasteful. They didn't leave messages carved on wood like some carnival villain's taunt. He took out his knife, stepped close, and sliced the rope above her wrists. The weight of her small frame collapsed onto him instantly. She had no strength to hold herself up. Dakota grunted softly, but steadied her with both arms, lowering her gently to the ground so she wouldn't faceplant. Her legs buckled beneath her, refusing to obey. She gasped, the circulation rushing back into her limbs like fire. Tears sprang to her eyes, not fresh ones, but the kind squeezed out of pure pain. Dakota crouched beside her. You must breathe slowly. Your arms will hurt. Your legs too. She tried, failed, tried again. When her breathing finally steadied, he untied the sign from her neck and held it up to the light. His jaw tightened. Indian land. He spat softly to the side, not disgust at her, but at the message. This was not left by my people, he said. Sarah nodded quickly. I know. They wanted people to think it was you. But it wasn't. Dakota studied her face, looking for truth. Her swollen eyes held fear, but no deception. Tell me what happened. She swallowed hard, her throat raw. They came at night. I didn't see their faces much. They wore clothes like settlers, but their faces had paint. Or mud. Something. She paused, wincing as she flexed her wrists. One of them said something about sending a message. Making sure the bluecoats pay attention. Another said, she hesitated, eyes clouding. Another said my father would know what happens when a man keeps land he hasn't really paid for. Dakota absorbed every word. The pieces clicked together with grim clarity. This was not Comanche rage. This was men stirring trouble, framing whoever was convenient. Someone wanted settlers terrified of the tribes again. Someone wanted to ignite old fires. He stood suddenly, scanning the distance, instincts prickling. Those men, did they leave right away? She nodded. I think so. They rode off after tying me up. Laughing. Then they will return, Dakota said quietly. They will want to see that you died. Or that their message was found. His tone held no emotion, just certainty. We must move Part 3, 700 words. The canyon's shadows stretched long across the plains, carving the earth into jagged fingers of stone and sand. Dakota led his horse carefully along a hidden path only he knew, a trail that wound through the cliffs like a serpent avoiding the sun. Sarah clung to him with both hands, not only for balance but because the fear that had settled in her chest refused to loosen its grip. Every snap of a twig, every distant whisper of the wind made her jump. Yet, despite the terror, a strange sense of safety coiled around her, an unfamiliar warmth she hadn't expected from a man she had been taught to fear. Dakota rode silently, his eyes scanning every ridge and fold of the canyon. The plains behind them were empty for now, but he knew it would not stay that way. The men who had staged this cruel display would return, whether for revenge, to finish their message, or to watch terror ripple through the settlers. The Comanche scout felt no anger at Sarah. She was a victim, a child caught in the hands of men with cruel intentions. The anger burned elsewhere, in the men who used lies and fear to spark conflict. What do they want with me? Sarah's voice was barely audible, a whisper that seemed to merge with the canyon's shadows. Her eyes darted to the cliffs, as if the rocks themselves might answer. Dakota didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the horizon, watching for movement that didn't belong. Your father refused to sell land, he said at last. Some men do not take refusal lightly. They will try to punish others to make their point. His voice was low, calm, but there was a steeliness that reminded Sarah she was no longer alone. They are using you as proof. She shivered. The words were heavy, like stones in her chest. Why would they hurt me? I didn't do anything. They don't need a reason, Dakota said. They only need a target. He shook his head, eyes narrowing. They want the world to believe the Comanche are cruel. To scare settlers. To make the tribes seem like monsters when the monsters are men like them. Sarah's hands tightened around his waist. The story was so much larger than she had imagined, a web of lies and hatred that threatened to swallow everything she knew. And yet, amidst it all, she felt the weight of Dakota's presence, a living barrier between her and the chaos. Hours passed as they wound deeper into the canyon. The sun climbed higher, bleaching the rocks into pale yellows and reds. The air was warmer here, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth, a smell so different from the dusty, wind-swept plains. Sarah took tentative breaths, letting the heat and smells ground her after the terror of the morning. Finally, they reached a small ledge, sheltered by an overhang of rock. Dakota dismounted and helped Sarah down. She stumbled, her legs still weak, and he caught her with a firm grip, steadying her. The canyon's shadows now cocooned them, a fragile barrier from the world outside. "You must rest," he said. "You are weak, and if they return, you will need strength to hide." "I'm scared," she admitted. Her voice trembled, but she didn't hide the truth. "You should be," Dakota said gently. "Fear keeps you alive, but you must not let it control you." He surveyed the canyon, knowing they could not stay here long. The men who had left her hanging would not give up easily. But for now, in this quiet hollow, he allowed her to feel safe. Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected, not only a protector but a man whose loyalty lay with justice, not hatred. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Her words were hesitant, as if speaking them might shatter the fragile trust forming between them. Dakota turned his gaze to the sun-scorched cliffs beyond. "Because this is still our land," he said finally. "Because no one dies on it unjustly if I can stop it. Because fear and lies have taken too much already." He met her eyes, and she saw the conviction there, a fire that would not be extinguished. A sudden noise shattered the fragile calm, a distant shout carried by the wind, the unmistakable sound of men riding fast, dust rising behind them. Dakota's eyes hardened. He moved with precise, silent efficiency, helping Sarah behind a large boulder. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she obeyed. "They are coming back," he said. "Stay behind me." Dakota unsheathed his knife, the blade glinting in the sunlight. His body shifted like a coiled spring, ready to protect, ready to fight. Sarah's eyes widened, fear mixing with awe. She had been left for death not once, but twice that day. And now, she realized, she was not alone. The riders appeared on the ridge, their intent clear, they wanted to complete their cruel performance. Dakota's gaze swept over them, analyzing their positions, their weapons, their intentions. The canyon would be a battlefield, but here, Dakota had the advantage. He had the land, he had knowledge, and now, he had Sarah's life in his hands. "Trust me," he whispered, more to himself than to her. They chose the wrong Comanche. Sarah gripped the rock behind her, feeling the solid, enduring strength of the earth beneath her. She had been scared, humiliated, and alone. But now, in the shadows of the canyon, with Dakota standing between her and the world's cruelty, she felt something she hadn't felt in hours, or perhaps in her life before this day, hope. And as the riders came closer, intent on violence, Dakota's eyes burned with a quiet promise. "No one dies unjustly on this land while he still breathes,"